Wadawurrung, Wadawurrung Maruk, Bengada, Gayupian Guma, Wadawurrung Ja, Wunga Yurun, Nur Wadden, Nadik Corrina, Wunga Will Mukbarin, Wadawurrung Bagurk. In Wadawurrung language I say, I call our Wadawurrung spirit to watch over us, protect us here in Wadawurrung country. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Corrina and I'm a proud, strong Wadawurrung woman. I acknowledge Corrina Eccles, our creator, our ancestor spirit, Yatni. I thank him for our creation of country, people, our cultural law, story, strength, and spirit, and our connection to our Kulin nations. I acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are listening this evening. I particularly acknowledge Thomas and his cultural strength in being with us this evening. It's an honour and a continuing cultural commitment to continue to welcome people to the lands of the Wadawurrung. On behalf of my ancestors' spirit, elders, our old people, and our families of today, and their role of continuing the spirit, connection, and to advocate and take on the cultural obligations of caring for our country. Our country consists of fresh water, salt water, our rivers, mountains, and all things living connected to this beautiful country, Wadawurrung country. Wadawurrung country encompasses the area from the Great Dividing Range in the north to our coast country in the south, from Wadawurrung River in the east to Aries Inlet in the west. Geelong, tongue of land, has a rich Wadawurrung history, a connection, a place that our spirit still holds, deeply connected to our mother of this land. It's a place of story, it's a place of gathering, it's a beautiful place for many of us to live and work. This place was a beautiful place. It was rich with resourceful country for my ancestors and the Wadawurrung people to live a sustainable life on this country. Their connection and care and responsibility to country, water, fire, language, family, cultural law practices, values, and connection and knowledge of all things living. I say Yatni Yatni, Moon Wadawurrung Ja, to my ancestors and many generations of Wadawurrung people who have walked before me, being nurtured, protected by our mother. Our mother is our country, and in return, if we nurture our mother, she will nurture us, and we will all live healthy, strong lives connected to this beautiful country. And we ask of all visitors to bring no harm, no greed, and no disrespect to our country. I will now welcome you all with the first language of this land, the mother tongue of the Wadawurrung. Moon Bengadi Kinkin Bill, Wedikuronguli Wadawurrung, Nalingui Kimbani Wadawurrung Ja, Nalingui Kimbani Yanabil now, Gayupun Gutmo, Yaluk Wari, Yulang no Pitch Muru, Purani Dulama Bengadak, Gayupian Guma Wadawurrung Ja, Gulum Wadanao, Wungu Will Kun Wood Gunya Gurai, Makbari, Gulum Murikai, Wadanao, Munamuna. Makburi, Nal, Gumut, Wadawurrung Ja. I say from my ancestors' family and community, I welcome visitors to Wadawurrung country. I welcome you from our freshwater, our mountain, coast and inland country. We are gathered on Wadawurrung country. Let us walk together strong as one in trust and peace. Let us learn together, hand in hand in peace, together as one on Wadawurrung country. Kimbani Wadawurrung Ja, welcome to Wadawurrung country, Yatni. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Corrina Eccles, for that beautiful welcome to country. In response, I'd like to say that the Geelong Regional Library Corporation acknowledges Wadawurrung original owners of the lands on which our library services operate, and we pay respect to Wadawurrung elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and celebrate First Nations peoples of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story.
So good evening, everyone. I say Yatni again and thank you all for joining us this evening. I also like to acknowledge the Geelong Regional Library and the Corporation. And of course, I like to acknowledge and thank our author for our event this evening, Thomas. It looks like we have around 200 people joining us this evening, which is absolutely fantastic. And as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, for us to give our time and continue to share our stories, our voices and our journeys, it's important that you all walk alongside us. So you joining us this evening is supporting us on our journey, and we hope that you can all take something away from what you hear tonight. A little bit of housekeeping. You can participate in this live webinar by clicking on the Q&A button and typing your question or comment. You may need to touch your screen to see the Q&A and chat functions if you are using an iPad or an iPhone tonight. Also, this webinar is being recorded. If you'd like to watch the discussion again or recommend to friends or families, you can watch it via the library's website from tomorrow onwards. So now I have the great pleasure of introducing Thomas Mayer. Thomas is a strong Torres Strait Islander fella, born on Larrakia country in Darwin. He is a father of 5, sharing his life with a beautiful wife and 5 children. Thomas uses his own journey and experience as a way to bring other stories and perspectives together while on the journey of the Uluru Statement from the heart. As a union official for the Maritime Union of Australia in his early 30s, he found strength in his voice while he was working on the wharves. Following the Uluru Convention in May 2017, Thomas was entrusted to carry the sacred canvas of the Uluru Statement from the heart. He then embarked on an 18-month journey around the country to traditional land, to yarn and have conversations on country with elders, respected people of those traditional countries, lands and communities that he was able to visit. Thomas' spirit and passion to garner support for a constitutionally enshrined First Nation voice and a Makarrata Commission for truth-telling and agreement making of treaties. He dedicates this book to the next generation with the hope that they will benefit from what we do in our lives. The next generation follow our footsteps. Tonight we hear from Thomas about this book, Finding the Heart of the Nation, the journey of the Uluru Statement towards voice, treaty and truth. Kimbani Thomas in Wadawurrung language. Welcome, Thomas.
So for the welcome, sister, yeah, I'm happy to be here tonight talking to you. Yep.
Thank you, Thomas. So now we are going to go into our conversation.
Sounds good. Yeah, I pay my respects to yourself and thank you for your welcome, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and also the Larrakia people here where I'm coming from in Darwin, their elders past and present as well.
Yatni. In saying thank you, I do want to, before we go into the questions, just acknowledge such a beautiful book. And, you know, it is Finding the Heart of the Nation, but it found a place in my heart, and I hope that everyone that takes the opportunity to read this book, it really connects to them and connects to their heart. And I know that is probably what you hope to achieve from this book. So on my perspective, and for me giving my feedback, I say Yatni and thank you for bringing this to my heart.
It's good to hear. Thanks.
So I might start with my first question. The name of the statement, Uluru. I'm asking you to share the significance of the language name Uluru and the meaning of the name and the connection of Uluru to this prominent statement from the heart.
Yeah, thanks. The word Uluru is actually a family, the Uluru family, and a place. So in the heart of the country, Uluru, what used to be called Ayers Rock, but the proper name is Uluru, is where we had the convention that endorsed the Uluru Statement from the heart. And so the name Uluru Statement from the heart, comes from that place that we had the tough discussions to reach a consensus. But it is also given to the campaign, the name, to give power to it. And if anybody's been to Uluru that's listening tonight, you'll understand the great power that that place holds. You certainly don't need to climb it. It's extremely disrespectful to climb Uluru. But just to be there in the presence of that place is a really moving thing. So the family Uluru, the last person interviewed in this book, and I did that purposely as the last person, is a guy named Sammy Wilson. And his name is actually Uluru, Chama Uluru, which means the grandson of Uluru. And Sammy took me to various places at Uluru and showed me around. And I talk about that in the book. And he explains the reason why the family gifted the name to the campaign to achieve what the statement calls for, as in that his community, Mutijulu, where Sammy lives, and Mutijulu is basically in the shadow of the rock. In the evening, the sun comes down, just into the rock as it goes into night. And he explains how Mutijulu was on the front line of the 2007 Northern Territory intervention, the emergency response, where based on a fabricated, based on lies, the Howard government moved the army into that community and just basically disempowered Aboriginal people throughout the Northern Territory, and really took away a lot of the progress that those communities had built towards autonomy and progressing their communities. And so Sammy's position, the Uluru family's position was they didn't want to be left isolated. They wanted other First Nations from around the country to be able to stand with them in a representative body that was able to defend from this sort of thing ever happening again. And that was one of the great motivations of the Uluru family to give us the name to the Uluru Statement.
While we're talking about statement, I might also touch base just on the beautiful artwork, on that canvas.
Yeah, it is really, really beautiful artwork, and it has a lot of meaning. And I'll just quickly bring it up here, just so people can get another look at it. This is the artwork here, and what it shows. This is actually a canvas, so it's a canvas that's about 1.8 meter high, and 1.8 meter wide, and 1.6 meters high. And this canvas, when we endorsed the Uluru Statement on the 26th of May 2017, this canvas was blank. And what was done was we had pencil marked around here, and after we endorsed it, 250 of us lined up and we put our names and our a lot of us put, where our country is, who we are, our First Nations. And we put all our names around here. And then afterwards, the 4 Anangu women, law women for the Anangu people, Rini Kulicha, Charmaine Brumby, Christine Brumby, Charmaine Kulicha, and Happy Reid, they painted this artwork around our names. And this artwork shows the song lines of the Chukupa, and the actual name Rini writes here in the bottom left-hand corner, Uluru Ku Chukupa, which means the story, these song lines that come together at Uluru. And so you can see the families, is the way Rini describes it in my book, that come from the north, east, south, and west. And where the Uluru Statement was printed is where all of these songlines connect. And so the great significance is, you know, similarly, we came from all points of the southern sky, from all directions around Uluru, together in that very sacred place, and made this very special statement about progressing our people.
It's an absolutely beautiful piece of art, and I think that's the importance of our education, is that people continue to understand the connection of our art, our stories, our language, how it's all connected to country. And it is all about, you know, sharing in those ways and being able to tell a story. So let's talk more about, we're now in 2020, and what do you feel has been the positive impact since the Uluru Statement?
Well, the Uluru Statement is really profound, because for the first time it comes after a Indigenous-led, as in how it was designed by an Aboriginal woman named Professor Megan Davis, a Cobble woman, who is a public law expert. And so she led the design of this process. The process was led by the Indigenous members of the Referendum Council. So Arnie Pat Anderson was the co-chair of the Referendum Council. And this process was 13 regional dialogues all around the country that elected delegates after three-day dialogues all around the country. Each of them had accurate records of meeting. They were taken through the history of the struggle through a film that world-class filmmaker Rachel Perkins made. About 20 minutes, goes from colonisation to all these moments in our nation's past and in the history of our struggle, where we've come together in various ways and made aspirational proposals, and always very generous as well, in line with our customs. You know, this generosity that we have about sharing, and always, like, and I'll mention a few: the Yirrkala Bark petitions, the Yolngu people trying to stop mining from happening on their land and destroying their sacred sites and hunting grounds, the Barunga Statement in the 80s that called for treaty and a voice, that Bob Hawke promised a treaty and broke that promise, and in regards to the voice, ATSIC was set up, and I'll talk about a bit about that later. The Larrakia petition to the Queen, and going further back before all of those, the Day of Mourning, and the petitions that happened in the 1930s. You know, all these times where we've put proposals towards a government or a king or a queen, and always had those hopes dashed against the rocks of political expediency. So we learnt about all those different parts of our struggle, all the different things that we've tried, and really poured our own, our experience in. There was a formula applied to these dialogues, so which included 60% traditional owners from the region, and that was so that you could try and capture a range of perspectives across the community, right? Rather than a strong interest group dominate a dialogue, which can happen. And so this very special process that ended at Uluru with the endorsement of the Uluru Statement, or didn't really end because we continue to fight for it, that was a very unique, it was unprecedented in that it was a consensus. It was a First Nations consensus unlike any other before, because this was a truly national process with Indigenous experts leading it and designing it. And to go to the answer to the question, what has changed is for the first time we have what we can say, hand on heart, is somewhat of a united position. And while some walked out of the Uluru Convention in 2017, 7 delegates, from more than 200, of course, we're never going to have 100% agreement on such big picture change, but we reached a consensus. And so what it's done is it has given us the opportunity, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but non-Indigenous people, to say, this is a consensus position. These are the steps that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want to take, and now let's go and pursue it until we achieve it. So unlike all those other statements and petitions, it's not gathering dust in Parliament. We can actually really fight for this one.
Yeah, well said. I liked how you touched based on the timelines and, you know, right throughout the book, you know, all the different people that you've spoken to talk about what's taken place on their country. And some of those stories, you know, they're really hard to read and acknowledge. But timelines differ, and every traditional owner group has a different timeline. And what we ask and what we need in our own traditional owner groups is where that voice needs to be led in, and every voice needs to be listened. And it sounds like, you know, the way it was collaborated and has moved forward, and the empowerment of being those voices that are speaking and being the people that are living and advocating for their countries and their communities has been a real strength to this.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of this, right? It doesn't call for a very specific end outcome, if you know what I mean, right? It simply tries to give First Nations a voice, you know, our various, to be able to decide who speaks for us. That's something that is also missing on a national basis. You know, First Nations, we have different levels of organisation, you know, different impacts of colonisation, and you know, different stages in process of native title or fighting against the dismissal of our claims to native title. And so the Uluru Statement, you know, the call for a constitutionally enshrined voice is not about what every First Nation wants. It's about being able to come together and then reach consensus on what the next steps are after we have a representative body, you know? So it is a really important step. I come from the union movement. The first thing we do is we establish who speaks for who, you know, who the delegate is in the workplace. We've got our structures to decide who our officials are, you know, our representatives. And that's what's missing since John Howard smashed ATSIC and destroyed that form of a voice. Like every other form of a voice we've had in the past, all the way back to the 1920s, the very first was the Australian Aboriginal Progress Association, through to the NAC, FACATSI, ATSIC, Congress of First Peoples. Every one of them has been destroyed. So we're trying to build that up and protect it in the Constitution so it can't be taken away again.
And with all those learnings of what's taken place in the past, which you just spoke about, again, is another timeline of what has been there for our people, but is no longer there and hasn't worked in the best interests of our people. And we need to continue to walk and talk, and particularly, you know, deliver this Uluru Statement from the heart. Something that really touched me, I love reading quotes, and I think we can all relate to this as Aboriginal people when we have our young people looking up to us, following our footsteps. So your quote was, "Our children will walk in two worlds," which is a personal quote that really does touch my heart. It is very hard for children to have that resilience and strength and cultural knowledge as children to stand up for some of those challenges when they identify or when they're strong in their culture. So tell me about your journey and your responsibility, and what is your hope for our children that comes from this?
I want them to grow up in a country that is different to what we've grown up in, you know, a country that embraces their culture, embraces our differences. And one of the beautiful things I think about establishing a representative voice, and, you know, I tend to get a bit political in my explanation, sorry, but it's so important that we are able to have a self-determining political organisation, which the voice would, in which our children will have a platform to speak from, like we haven't really had, you know, in our lifetimes. And one of the ways I recognise this power that establishing a First Nations voice will have is if you look at ATSIC, you know, it had its problems, right? And the Howard government certainly demonised or use those problems to demonise the organisation and Aboriginal people right up until they destroyed it. You know, it was a bit it was tactical in that sense. But it shouldn't have been destroyed. You know, the problem should have been dealt with. There was a review done, and it, you know, it should have been able to evolve. And that's one of the reasons. That's why we need to protect it constitutionally. But if you look at some of the leaders that exist that are around today, a lot of those people were young people in ATSIC back in its day. And they learnt black politics. They learnt about the broader politics of Australia. They learnt about bureaucracies. They learnt about policy. And so, you know, the voice will be important for our children, not just to have a platform to work towards, to speak on behalf of their people in a really strong and united way that we don't have now, but also to learn about political advocacy and furthering our people's interests. And yeah, so that's there's a number of reasons why this is so important to the next generation.
And just to lead on from that conversation, we know deep in our hearts and in our spirits, and we hear it throughout the book, many people say it is about education. And one of your quotes that you quoted, truth telling our history is vital. It is the education. How do you think we can be better doing that?
Yeah, well, I think again it goes to the proposals in the Uluru Statement. And there's two proposals that affect truth telling. The first is, and the most obvious one, is the Makarrata Commission. And Makarrata is a Yolngu word, and it means the coming together after a struggle. And it's not a thing, Makarrata, it's a process. It's a process, you know, which is basically like dispute resolution. And the Yolngu people describe how when an agreement is reached, you know, so firstly the parties bring the truth in their hearts to the table, and when an agreement is reached, they the person they come closer than they were before. So, for example, if it was someone from another family and the settlement came, he would be accepted into that family as someone, you know, that is loved like a family member. And so Makarrata is very much about truth telling because you bring the truth to that process. The commission would supervise a process of truth telling. So we need to keep in mind that truth telling has been going on for a very long time in this country. It's not something that we need to start right now. It's been, you know, in the history books for decades. We know what is written in the explorers' journals. There are books like Dark Emu nowadays and my own book that have truth telling. There are documentaries. There is many forms, performances, many forms of truth telling that happen today. And then also there is Royal Commission reports, inquiries, you know, that are full of very factual and researched truth telling. And so truth telling is not something you can say, oh, we need truth telling first, because it's been going on for a very long time. But truth telling through a Makarrata Commission would be coordinated, it would be well resourced, you know, it would be used to be able to make change and educate people in a more effective way. The second thing about truth telling is that the voice is vital to truth telling, because truth telling needs a voice or the political organisation that is able to use the truth to achieve outcomes that go, you know, to prepare, to repair the effect of what the truth of this nation is. And so the voice is really important to truth telling.
Yeah, and I acknowledge a quote on page 61 from Wayne, and he quotes, you know, truth telling and the voice to Parliament. For there to be an acceptance of what has happened, it should be taught in our education system.
Yeah.
So the same statement was being made over and over again. But like you said, and it was, you know, tried to get across in your book, it is really important that there is a structure, that there is the recognition, that there is the sovereignty and the things that are in place so all this can then fall into place.
Yeah. spot on. Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that were really common. So I interviewed 20 people for this book, and the publisher said, be happy if you can interview 9, Thomas, you know, and I'd never interviewed anyone before, and I'd never written a book, you know, I'm just a wharfie. And I said, initially I said I wanted to interview 30 people because I sort of wanted to cover a bit more. They said, be happy if you can do 9, but in the end I ended up doing 20. And I was worried after I did 20 interviews and then I had to write all their stories up. I was worried that they would be too similar, you know, that the book would be boring. But they're all, you know, they're different, you know, like they have these different perspectives, you know, different political ideologies, you know, so, and so many different experiences that it was all, you know, nicely different. But a couple of things were in common. All of the people in the book wanted truth-telling, but they also experienced the results of our truth, right? The racism of this country. In common, they all have felt the effects of racism over generations. Secondly, they all, far out, I've forgotten what the other one is. They all experienced racism, but they all had hope. That was the second thing, you know, like in every one of these stories, these wonderful people don't dwell on that truth. They say, this is our truth and we want people to know it. We want something done about it. And, you know, we are hopeful and we're inclusive on how we do this. And, you know, that really came through in each of the interviews. And in the Uluru Statement from the heart itself, you know, so if you think of the mindsets of people that, you know, are captured in this book, it comes out in the Uluru Statement as well, that a majority of Indigenous people want this. But secondly, that the Uluru Statement is written to the Australian people. It's an invitation to the Australian people to walk with us, you know, and have a part of this ancient culture.
Talking about your process of bringing this all together, so interviewing 20 people,
yeah.
Wow, how blessed to go across country and have the ability, you know, to go on those traditional lands and interview and have a yarn on country and hear those stories that many stories have been passed down for many generations, but also hearing a lot of that truth telling, which is very, very hard to cut, you know, to carry, which we'll talk about a bit later. But just on that, how did you go with interviewing people? You know, traditionally, many of us, it is only oral sharing. So I'd like to know what your process was of being able to capture all those conversations that you were having.
Yeah, I had to feel my way through it really, and I think the real criteria that ensured it was successful was just respecting people, you know, not you know, understanding that we're all different. You know, I know that as a Torres Strait Islander, even our various First Nations in the Torres Strait, you know, we have our differences in different languages and different customs. So it was all about listening and respect, and ensuring that I followed protocol, you know, and didn't pretend or try to assume that I knew things.
So on page 18, you talk about the respect you have for Auntie Pat Anderson. And this is something that really touched me as a woman when I read your book. The words you used were, she always is conducting herself with integrity. She is affable, witty, and gets straight to the point. So just touching on that, over the past decades, ourselves as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we have seen an increase in our women being able to have a voice. And I think the NAIDOC theme really helped this. Because of her, we can. It was a strong theme that really allowed us women to, you know, have a voice and be acknowledged during this time. So tell me how you felt in regards to many of the interviews you had coming across from many strong women in the communities.
Look, there's some amazing women that I interviewed in my book. And I agree, that was the best theme ever, you know, because of her. Yeah. 2018. But also in this campaign, you know, like this is being led by women, and I really think that, you know, women in leadership is the way to go in the future. You know, I just have so much respect for the strength of women. You know, Arnie Pat Anderson, Teela Reid, Professor Megan Davis, Rachel Perkins, you know, and then all of the people that haven't, the women that haven't otherwise been heard, you know. And that's one of the reasons why I sort of tried to choose people in the book with a lower profile, you know, and so you can see these voices really coming through, and they are the strength and the backbone of this campaign, and I think of our future.
Yeah. So touching on that again, you know, being able to have all these yarns, how is your self-care doing this? We carry, you know, layers and layers and thousands of years of knowledge, but thousands of years of hurt and heaviness of what's taken place on our countries. And you were hearing all that straight from the heart of those people. But I love the way you speak about hope, because that is what holds them all together, is hope. But yeah, how did you look after yourself and manage your own self-care?
Yeah, it was, I mean, it's difficult what we know is happening to our people every day, you know, as if that's enough. And then seeing the, you know, the prejudice that still exists, seeing the harmful decisions that are made that affect our people. But then also, you know, the interviews and hearing all of those sad stories. But I think you can't, I don't think it's possible to communicate something and move people unless you feel it yourself, you know, and I really hope that comes through in my writing, because I know that people need to feel something to be moved to support this campaign and vote yes. So it's really what I tried to convey. Myself, you know, I mean, I'm a big-hearted person and everything, but I'm quite resilient, fortunately. It takes a fair bit for me to feel stressed. And, you know, when I can, I stay grounded by going fishing and hunting, you know, get a bit of salt water, and that really helps me refresh and be with family. I hadn't been with family for quite a bit over the last 3 years, but, you know, they understand what I'm trying to do, and they appreciate that it's important work.
And to follow on from that, I read a quote that was from Wadawurrung, and this was his quote: "You will hear us tonight, and we will be singing to our ancestors, who are your ancestors too. We will be singing to them to remind them that we are here, maintaining our connection to them for their appreciation. And we do this not just for ourselves, but for all of us." So when you're on that journey and you were hearing all that heaviness, to stand and hear that come from a strong Aboriginal person is something that would have just continued to enrich your spirit and continue to give you that strength. And I suppose in many ways, you know, feel privileged that you're able to hear those words and be able to feel those words that you're also hearing from those people as well that you interviewed. I think I've probably got time for one more question before we have to go. And you did mention this young woman's name before, which was Teela Reid. And Teela Reid, she was the youngest who gathered with you at the trial dialogue. And one of the quotes that you had in the book that she said was, "My grandparents' story of survival shaped who I am today." I feel that your book and your journey captures spirit, and it captured the resilience and the strength, but it also captured layers of trauma. It captured cultural disconnection, broken spirit. So when you're hearing that from our young people, and that just shows how our young people are carrying that weight as well. But to hear a young girl, you know, speak that and be the youngest of that group, and for you to mention her again, being able to have a voice. And I hope that, you know, you going on this journey has also given, you know, strength to other young people to see that, you know, that what we say is, you know, there's no such thing as can't. We can, and we can achieve. And if we follow our spirit and our heart and our ancestors, which you also talk about, how our ancestors are always with us. You're not standing alone, you're not talking on your own, that they talk with you. And I just want to acknowledge, you know, some of those beautiful statements that you carried. I think the last question, I'll finish off before questions actually, is on page 140. And this was the song, Uluru, We Look to You. And I did listen to that song, and it really touched my heart. But a paragraph from that song. I have a dream that the suffering has ended. Indigenous Australia has been united. Come on, politicians, listen and learn today. Listen and learn today. Do you want to share more about the journey in the song?
Yeah, this was
Andrew?
special moments in, you know, my journey with the Uluru Statement from the heart. It was would have been 2018, I think, early 2018. Malcolm Turnbull had dismissed the Uluru Statement in October 2017. And this guy, Andrew McCutcheon, he was a councillor in St Kilda and was the Attorney General at one point in the Victorian Parliament. And he was on his deathbed. He had motor neurone disease, and he didn't have long to go. And part of his therapy was a songwriter. So he and this songwriter and his family wrote this song, and you know, he was so disappointed in what Malcolm Turnbull had done, the politicians, and so yeah, he put this together. And you know, one of his the last things that he said before he passed on was that he hoped it could go viral. And so I wanted to make sure that it was in the book so people could read the story and his beautiful song.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really enjoyed reading that, and of course listening to the song. We're now going to go into questions. So here we go. So one of them I see here is, how do we help to assist the Uluru Statement from the Heart process to assist the truth telling?
That's an excellent question, because I wrote the books because it's a campaign, you know, not because, you know, not just to be an author. I wanted to move people to take action. And so there are a couple of websites. So, you know, just like other big campaigns in our nation's history, there are different parts of the campaign. So there's a couple of different websites. www.ulurustatement.org is one of them, and also www.fromtheheart.com.au. So people can sign up on those websites and you know, follow the campaign. They can get more information there. As far as actions go, I encourage you to write to your local members of Parliament, especially the federal ones. We want you to put pressure on them to support a constitutionally enshrined voice and the Mack Commission. Secondly, we've had some success in this campaign, so it's not all doom and gloom. We went from complete dismissal in October 2017 through a couple of, you know, with people power, forcing the government to come back to the questions in the Uluru Statement. So now we're in a position where the voice is acknowledged as the most desired reform, both of Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And so there's an advisory group that's going through developing the potential models for a representative body. But the government, the Morrison government, have tried to separate constitutional recognition from the voice, which means if it's just constitutional recognition, that's symbolic, you know, nothing substantive about it without the voice or a representative body. If they just legislate the voice, then it's vulnerable to a hostile government like all the other rep bodies. So when that comes time for public submissions, we want everybody to make a submission to that advisory group saying, we demand that the Uluru Statement is respected and that the voice is constitutionally enshrined. So that's coming up. Spread the word as well. So spread the word about the Uluru Statement from the heart. You know, what I've told you tonight is part of our truth telling now. You know, and these words, the Uluru Statement, are very, very moving. And we know that from our research that when people learn about the statement, they support it. And that's the only thing that we need to do to convince them.
Thanks. Our next question that has been asked is in regards to that 20-minute movie or little film that you spoke earlier on. You mentioned Rachel Perkins had put together. Is that available?
It's available as a teaching resource, and I can't tell you the exact website. It's also been made available for a course that I've started running. The first one is next week, actually. I've developed an advocacy course, learning over the years that you can't take for granted that people understand how to advocate. And so it takes a lot of union type training and combines it with, you know, the history of our struggle and the nuances of what the Uluru Statement calls for. And then ends with mapping, you know, to help people work out what actions they can take and with who, and, you know, who the decision makers are and all that. That's being run through the ACTU, so the Australian Council of Trade Unions. So union members are able to apply to do that course. And that's one of the ways as well.
Okay, another question. Do you feel Australia is closer to changing the date of Australia Day? Do you think something like that would mark a symbolic shift?
It's not something I'm very passionate about. I mean, I agree to change the date. You know, I think, you know, we shouldn't celebrate a nation that hasn't acknowledged, you know, or had recognition of the First Nations people and all of our, the truth of our past. And it's not really a day to celebrate for Indigenous people, in my view. Though that's my personal opinion. I think that it would be an important change, but it goes to the importance of a representative body, right? It's just my opinion. It's just the opinion of other individuals or even groups. But we can't, there is no process of First Nations people collectively saying what their position is about the date or what date would be better. And so I think until we establish a First Nations voice, that is a very difficult question to answer about if we should change the date or when to.
And we've had many people agree that your book should be part of the school curriculum. How's that looking?
How to do that. So if there's any experts that can help that along, that'd be great with the right questions. But I'll take this opportunity, I suppose, to say, you know, this isn't for personal profit, this book. Every cent of the travels with the canvas initially, and still today, my part in this campaign is supported by the Maritime Union of Australia, my union. I was a wharfie, so they've committed a lot to support us in this, the MUA. And so the book, you know, my travels and all that were helped, you know, by the MUA as well. So every cent of the royalties, author royalties for this book, go directly to the MUA, and the MUA is putting it into the campaign. And so, yeah, if we could, the more copies that are sold, the more people learn about the statement, but also the more funds we have to do things like, we had an action in Scott Morrison's electorate a couple of times now in Cronulla. People said, you're crazy, you know, you're going to go to Cronulla, that's where the race riots were, and you want to go there and talk about, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander self-determination? I said, no, it's all right, you know. So we got a good large gathering there in the mall. We didn't have permission from the council or anything. I made a short speech, and then we just very respectfully, this was the instructions to people, we want you to go and respectfully engage with normal people in the mall here and just try and have a conversation with them. And it went really well, you know, so that's part of the things that we do with the funds. You know, put a couple of stickers under the door in Scott Morrison's electorate office and things like that. Yeah.
Good on you. So one of the questions here, where does a treaty fit into this process? And are there key components or a completely different process? Excellent
question. So the Uluru Statement can be summed up as voice, treaty, truth. So the other part of the Makarrata Commission is supervising agreement making or treaty. And so what we A lot of First Nations people in the process to Uluru and at Uluru itself said one of the desires was to have an agreement or treaty making, a settlement. And we didn't use the opportunity at Uluru, you know, with 200 and something, you know, delegates from all around the country coming together. We didn't just call for treaty. We put some thinking behind that, because treaty making was already happening in Victoria for several years now. That the very complex process has been finding its way, and it's a difficult thing in a contemporary setting, you know, not at the beginning of a colonizer invading your land. But also treaties are happening in the Northern Territory. You know, the process has begun. WA and Queensland have announced they will. And in South Australia, it started and ended with a change of government. Again, one of the reasons for a constitutionally enshrined voice to hold state governments to account over things like that, right? But the other thing is for treaty making is that if the treaties are being done between a group of First Nations or a First Nation and a state or territory government, it's missing the layer of negotiation that will be required in a federal system. Because we're a federal system, the federal government has the majority of the power. And so a negotiation of a treaty in a state is going to fall short without a First Nations voice established to negotiate what the Commonwealth's obligation is to the treaty, and then also to protect the outcomes once a treaty is done, to help protect the outcomes. So treaty is very much one of the things that the Uluru Statement calls for. But the sequencing that was done at Uluru, and I gave the speech just before the Uluru Statement was endorsed, and I took people through the sequencing of the reforms. Voice comes first for that reason, in that establishing a national First Nations rep body would strengthen the treaty process and the outcomes that we may be able to achieve, among other things.
I just want to thank everyone who sent their questions through, and feel free, we have a couple of more minutes left for others that may want to send their questions through. I think we have covered most of them. Great answers, you're nailing it, Thomas. You know, it's very difficult to do something like this via Zoom. So one of my questions that I want to ask is, for everyone that is listening and being connected to this tonight, what can people do to help the campaign?
Yeah, you can join those websites, register on those websites that I mentioned, ulurustatement.org and fromtheheart.com.au. You can write to your federal members of parliament, also write to the Prime Minister, write to the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt, and express your desire for the Uluru Statement to be met in full, which includes a referendum to enshrine a voice, and be quite specific about that. You can also start a local supporter group. We have supporter groups started in Sydney and in the northern rivers of you know, the Tweed Heads area, in WA, the Noongar mob. And so whether it's a street or a workplace or a suburb or a, you know, or a city, start a support group, get some like-minded people, meet regularly, you know, once every couple of weeks or something, and come up with ideas on how to further educate people about this and also put pressure on the politicians. Keep in mind, the Uluru Statement is an invitation. It is a First Nations consensus, and therefore, so long as you are pursuing what the Uluru Statement invites you to walk with us on, then you don't need to feel like you're doing the wrong thing. You just need to, you know, follow your heart and do what you can. But also keep in mind, not every First Nations person supports this. That's normal, and I want you to know that that shouldn't deter you from pursuing this, because you know, this is very well explained now, and you can see what I'm talking about. It doesn't diminish sovereignty, and it's the very next step that we need to take. Thank you.
We've just had a couple more questions that have come through.
Yeah.
And one is from Stuart. So how are young Indigenous people being included so their voice is heard too?
Yeah, there was around 20 youth at Uluru, and it wasn't really done on purpose, as in the design of it, but each of the dialogues all put an effort in to try and make sure that youth were represented at Uluru. So that was one way that they were included in this. And those guys have done some work together since then. For example, early in the campaign, the youth that were at Uluru jointly penned a letter to the politicians asking them to strengthen their resolve on this, and that was especially important because at the time Labor was a little bit shaky, so that helped to bring them on board. And at the moment, in Cairns late last year there was a big youth summit. Around 80 youth from around the country were involved in that, and those youth are now working on ways to involve more youth. So that's a couple of the methods that we've used.
And I think the journey that you've taken, Thomas, and your advocacy and writing this book and putting it out there, you are not doing this for yourself. Anything we do as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is always for our young people. This will continue, to be something that our young people will read, they'll grasp, they'll use that to give themselves a voice. They'll be able to read, the voices and the language and the statements from many respected people from all over Australia representing their people and their community. And it is about putting those resources out there for our younger people, to support our younger people to have a voice. It is time to finish up. And before we finish up, I am going to leave you with the last words tonight. Excuse me, I have many questions here everywhere. So I'm going to put it back to you and ask you to end the session on a quote or a message that you'd like to end with to everyone that is engaged and taken the time to listen to this conversation this evening.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll end this. I don't think we have time for me to recite the whole Uluru Statement, but I'll end with the last part of it, which is the invitation. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Thank you, Geelong Library. Thank you, Corrina, for everything. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thanks, Thomas, for a great discussion tonight. Like I said, the book has really touched me. Having the yarn with you and reflecting on that book has been great, and it's something that all people should do. We all need to sit down, yarn and share our stories in order to educate all. I want to thank all people that have listened tonight. If you're wanting to purchase the book, Finding the Heart of the Nation, or the newly released children's version, which you might want to hold up, Thomas, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And that is about young people, and that's about all young people. And we hope that we can see that in all the kindergartens and all the libraries. Jump online on the online bookstore for either of those two books. And copies are also available to borrow from the Geelong Regional Libraries in hard copy and also in an e-book format. Libraries have now reopened at reduced capacity, but see the website for the current opening times at your local branch. And don't forget to check out the library's Facebook page for more upcoming events and important discussions that you can join in from your home via Zoom. So on behalf of the library, myself and Thomas, I thank you all for joining us tonight. And if we have no more questions that I think we have to touch, I am going to say Gulbada in Wadawurrung language, which means take care. And Yapni, Thomas, thank you.
Yawo, everybody. Thank you, Corrina. Bye.